guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover, and I'm here today to do the first part of my May wrap up. I got loads of books read in May, so I am going to make things a little bit easier for myself and split this wrap up into two parts. So I'm going to do the first 10 or so books that I've read, but this also includes a couple of books that I got from the library that I need to return as well, so I can have the physical books. I am going to include those ones in this wrap up as well. The first book I finished in May was Fire Rush, and this is by Jacqueline Crooks, and this is a book that is actually was longlisted and has now been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. Every year I decide to treat myself a little bit when the Women's Prize for Fiction longlist comes out, and I decide on a few books that I want to buy for myself to read, and sometimes they're books that I know that I love, and other times they're books that I feel might challenge me a little bit, or books that I might not necessarily have picked up on my own if they hadn't been put on the list. So this is definitely one of those books. This starts off in London in the 1970s, I think it is, and we're following a young black woman who is living and partying in London with her friends. She's going down to this kind of underground club a lot where she listens to, I think it's kind of like reggae music, and you know, music of, I guess, like the 70s that would be really, really in. And you know, she kind of has a carefree life in many ways, in terms of, you know, she's kind of working a job that she might not necessarily absolutely love, but she is with her friends, she's finding love, and then she ends up falling in love with this young man, which ends up cutting off very tragically and in a way that is very, very heartbreaking for her. And she ends up going on this journey that eventually takes her to her parents' hometown in Jamaica, where she is kind of trying to figure out who she is, where she came from, and what she wants to do next as well. This is a really beautifully told book. It is a very, very lyrical book, and there's like obviously just because music plays such a big part in the story and in the character's life, it is a book where music is very, very important. It's a book where music is very, very important in it, and I'm not someone who I would say is very, very musical, but I still really enjoyed a lot of the lyrical qualities that was in the writing, and the type of description and just the prose that was used to describe so many things. The relationship that the character is in at the start of the book is just so beautiful, and the love is so rich and so real, and you can really, really feel it through the pages. And I was really affected by how that relationship turned out, and I really, really felt for the main character as she was going through some really, really turbulent times. And then we see people take advantage of some of her feelings, her grief, her anger, her struggle to try and make things better. We also see some like interesting points in I guess London or English history between the police forces and people of colour as well, in terms of riots, and also in terms of police brutality and just like misconduct by police. And I don't know too much about that, in terms of, I've obviously read a lot of books that have focused on it in America, but I haven't read so much that is focused on it in the UK, so it was very interesting to learn about that in this book. So yeah, I really, really enjoy this. I gave it like a 3.5 to 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it for people to read. And I've heard the audiobook for this is really, really good, and because of the musical elements in it, it's what like makes it a really good audiobook. So if I was to ever reread this, I would probably reread it on audiobook, as I've heard really, really good things about that. Next book I read was a historical fiction book, and that is The Redbird Sings by Aoife Fitzpatrick. This is actually set I think it's West Virginia, with a couple of characters, but we're following a mother and a young girl, and they are both connected by the death of this girl who was found dead one day in her cottage, and now her husband, who she was only married to for a very short time, is being brought into court to charged with murder of his young wife. And we are seeing the girl's best friend and the girl's mother, who are both dealing with the death of their friend and their daughter, and they really, really want to see this man get justice. But obviously they are living in a very patriarchal society, a society in which women who are different or unusual in any way are normally looked down upon or belittled in different ways. And we see that happen to both of these characters in a variety of different ways, and through flashbacks and through letters and things like that, we find out about their relationship with the girl who has died. And kind of also we get the court cases as well, and how the murder trial happens. And this is all based on a true story as well, which is quite interesting. This one was good. I don't think there was anything wrong with the writing in this one at all. Not necessarily, I think, a story that like really captured me in any way. There's a little bit of like magical realism to do with this book, in terms of the mother that we're following in this book believes that she's able to commune with spirits, like with the other side, with ghosts and with spirits, and she believes that her daughter is trying to tell her what really happened to her. And there were times where I wasn't sure, like, you don't really know if the woman is telling the truth or if it's something that is like kind of going on in her head. And I kind of would have liked that to have been a bit more, I don't know, firm maybe. But yeah, it's kind of like that blending of the genres a little bit doesn't always work for me in that way. And I'm actually reading a book at the moment that has something really, really similar, where it's a blend of historical fiction and kind of magical realism, speculative fiction, and it's not working for me. So I think maybe that just doesn't work for me in general, unless it's very, very clear what is going on. It was fine, it was good, but it wasn't one that I just really loved for not really any reason. It just didn't do it for me. But what I will say is I I liked the writing style. I thought the look at this time period as well was done really well. So I would definitely read more of this author's work if she brings out more historical fiction. And the way she writes as well, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Hannah Kent and how she has written in Burial Rites and The Good People, where she has kind of taken things that have happened in real life and has created a story about them. This is really similar to that, so I think if you like those books by Hannah Kent, you might really, really like this book by Aoife Fitzpatrick, so it's definitely worth a shot. So I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished was an audiobook, and one that I actually really, really enjoyed, and that was The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I've read 2 other books by Beth O'Leary, and they've both, one of them was fine, flat chair, it was fine. I didn't love it, but it was enjoyable for what it was. And then I read The Road Trip, which I really didn't like because I just didn't really like the characters at all. So this one is, those ones I both read physically. This is the first audiobook of Beth O'Leary's that I've read, and this is definitely my favorite one so far. I really, really enjoyed the audiobook experience of this because the 2 narrators were just very, very good, and I also just loved the very different voices of the 2 characters. So we are following Lena and Eileen. Lena is Eileen's granddaughter, and she's been having a hard time in work, and she's been basically told that she's basically been given a sabbatical from work for, I think it's 2 months, to basically get some rest and relaxation and like a mental health break, because she really, really needs it. And then Eileen is also having a little bit of a hard time in their small town in Yorkshire? I think it was in Yorkshire, where they're from. She's just kind of feeling like a little bit unlucky in love, and she would like to get back out on the dating scene. So Lena and Eileen end up switching lives for the 2 months, where Lena moves back in with her grandmother, and her grandmother goes to London and moves into Lena's flat with her 2 flatmates, and kind of gets involved with the London dating scene and online dating and stuff, where Lena back home is kind of just trying to recover from some really traumatic things that have happened in her life, kind of get back in connection with her mother, and then also just heal herself, body and mind and soul. It was just really fun for me. I in particular really, really loved Eileen's point of view, and as well I just really appreciated having the story told by an older character, and the different things that was kind of being hit on, and the different kind of social issues that we were tackling via Eileen's point of view. I think looking at loneliness within elderly people, and not only loneliness, but how it can be really hard for elderly people, especially in today's more kind of modern world, to be able to navigate the world in a way where, in like, if they're not as connected to technology the way like younger people are. And then also how scary it is for older people to try and get back out there after maybe years of being with the same people, or in the same like house, or in the same environment, how hard it is to step out of that and to do something new. And I just really, really loved how this book showed that. But also we also get loads of elderly characters in Lena's point of view as well, and how we see that everyone like has their own agency, and just because you're older doesn't mean that you fade in the background and sit down in a chair and like wait to die, which I feel like, number one, I feel like society normally like tries to brainwash people into thinking about older people, in terms of older people tend to just like become like invisible for a lot of ways, and people tend to forget about them. And I just loved how this didn't do that and brought them to the fore, and there was just some really powerful kind of stories within that I really, really enjoyed. So yeah, this was a really, really pleasant surprise for me, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I read a book that is probably one of my favourite books of the year, which I'm really happy with, and that is The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. And this is a book that we first We first meet Rachel as an older, she's in her 30s, and she is heavily pregnant. She has her husband, she's living in London, and we know that she's a journalist. And she is off covering something for the paper that she works in, and someone sees her in a pub and they recognise her from their days in college in Cork in Ireland, and he says something about her to her about someone that she once knew a long time ago, and it kind of like triggers something within her, and we end up flashing way back to when she is in her last year of university in Cork in Ireland, and she ends up meeting this man who's going to become her best friend forever, and his name is James. He is a gay man, and the two of them end up moving in together and, you know, partying and just getting up to a lot of like things that you get up to when you're like 2021 and you don't have a job yet, and you know, you're kind of waiting for college to finish and you don't really know what you're going to do yet with your life, and you're just making a lot of questionable decisions because that's the time of your life that you're able to do that. An affair with someone ends up kind of changing both of their lives for basically forever, and we see how that affair starts, how it like kind of stops and starts and begins again in many different ways, how it connects to both James and Rachel's life, and how it kind of shapes, particularly Rachel, it shapes her into becoming the woman she is when we first meet her, as almost mother to be in London, married, happily married, and how everything that has happened has shaped her to be that woman that she now is. This one I just absolutely loved. I thought it set the atmosphere and the setting in this was so good, in terms of you're looking at Ireland at a very very particular time that I just thought was excellent. Shows like friendship and love in a really great way as well, and particularly like a platonic kind of love, a love that is very very deep but isn't romantic or sexual, and how, you know, sometimes like you can have a person in your life that is literally the your sun and stars, but it doesn't have to be someone who you are romantically involved with. It can be a best friend, or it can be someone you admire in some way, and I just really love that. This book isn't actually out until June, but I would really recommend people check it out. I think this is going to be a book that a lot of people are going to be talking about this year, and I'm already like looking forward to rereading it, which I always love when that happens with books. So yeah, I absolutely love this and would really highly recommend it. So it was a 5 out of 5 stars. Next book I read was the first book in a crime series where I've already read, I think it was the third or fourth book, but because I loved that book so much, I wanted to go back to the start and read the series from the start, and that was Close to Home by Cara Hunter. And in this book, this is the first book in the D.I. Adam Fawley series, where we're following Adam Fawley is kind of like our main character that we're following, and he's in charge of this team, obviously of detective inspectors and stuff like that, and they're called out onto the case of this young girl who has gone missing and no one knows where she is. And as they all kind of investigate the story more and more, it really feels like the family are hiding something. There are things missing in the story, and it feels people don't know what has happened to this girl. Is she in danger? Is it possible that someone in her family may have hurt her? And the story just kind of keeps like, they keep hitting dead end upon dead end, and it's kind of like time is starting to run out to possibly get this girl home safe. This one was again, like, it was enjoyable for me. I liked going back to the start. I think this book, like, as kind of like a crime series, I think it's really tightly written. I think the cases like was really good, in which is similar to the later book that I also read. But and I definitely was like really kind of guessing. I didn't really know what was going to happen, and I really kind of felt on the edge of my seat in a way to really like figure out what had happened, because I just couldn't really figure out what was going on in parts of the story. But then I will say I did find myself a little bit disappointed by the end of the book, and kind of the slight twist at the end, and when it's revealed to the reader what has happened. I just felt it was like a tad little bit unrealistic for me, and yeah, I just kind of felt disappointed in the story. I just felt like I didn't get the aha moment that I wanted with crime books like this. I just didn't get that moment when things kind of are resolved together. I felt like I still had a lot of question marks, and it just wasn't a particularly satisfactory ending for me. So I gave this one again a 3 to a 3.5 stars. Wasn't as good as the later book that I had read, but I'm looking forward to reading the next book in the series and continuing on and seeing what happens with the series. After that, I read a couple of books from the library. The first one of this was Chosen by a Horse by Susan Richards. This is a book that I had on my like Goodreads want to read for a really long time, and I've eventually managed to read it. And this is a non-fiction book, which is kind of what it says and what you would think by the cover, which is about a woman called Susan who ends up adopting this horse called Lay Me Down. she ends up adopting this horse from a very abusive situation, and she ends up looking after this horse for a number of years and connecting with this horse. And this story is kind of how about this horse kind of managed to like make her think about different things in her life and start taking steps in a more positive direction when it came to the way she was living her life and the loneliness she was feeling and her like need or yearning for romantic connection somewhere. This horse kind of ended up giving her the courage to like take a step forward in the right direction when it came to that. This book was okay for me. It was kind of disappointing in some ways because I feel like the author obviously just wanted to write a book, and she says that during this book that like she wanted to write a book. She knew she was going to write a book, but just what was that book going to be about? And I think she got this opportunity of this horse that came into her life, and she was like, okay, well, I'm going to write a book about this. And I feel like the author thinks that she had this like character growth from like the start of this book to the end. And she really didn't, because she didn't actually end up doing anything to make her situation better. She actually ended up kind of making it worse in some ways. Just a very frustrating book in that sense. And we do find out a lot from the author about past situations that she'd been in. She obviously had an abusive childhood, and then when she was a young woman in her 20s, she ended up becoming an alcoholic. And this is all in the past, so she's like recovered from that now. But it's like, why didn't you write a book about that and about your first horse, who was like her main horse, who was a different book, who was a different horse than the one this book is about. And it's like, why didn't you write a book about that horse and like your alcoholism and getting out of that with that horse, instead of like, and this one could have been like a follow-up book to that. It just would have made a lot more sense. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I just felt like just didn't work with this book, and I'm disappointed because it's a book about horses, so I wanted to love it. But what I will say is the horse that this book is about, Lay Me Down, sounds like a really lovely horse, and there were definitely moments in this book that I got very emotional because it was about Lay Me Down and just her journey. And yeah, so I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, but it was more disappointing than enjoyable, unfortunately. Then I read Sovereign by CJ Sansom. This is the third book in the Matthew Shardlake series, and this is set during the reign of King Henry VIII, and this one is set in 1541. And we are following Matthew Shardlake, who is a lawyer, as he joins the King's progress into the progress, yes. He joins the King's progress into the north, and they end up in York City, which was kind of the location of a lot of like rebellions against the crown. So it's a very interesting kind of place in England for the king to be, because a lot of people there don't really like him. And at this point in time, he is married to Catherine Howard, and we all know how that ended up, especially if you are a fan of Six. You will probably know that Catherine Howard is one of the queens that got her head chopped off. But we follow Matthew as he's just trying to like live like a peaceful life. He doesn't really like getting involved in trouble, even though he always ends up getting involved in it, and kind of dragged reluctantly into the trouble. And this happens again as he ends up uncovering what seems to be kind of like a conspiracy theory about King Henry VIII and his heritage, and his right to be on the throne, and his birthright, and what his bloodline actually is, and is he actually God's chosen to be on the throne. And because Matthew ends up finding this, his life ends up in danger over and over and over again, and he has to try and figure out what the conspiracy theory is about. He has to try and figure out who is kind of in charge of it in a way, and who is spreading it, and then he also has to find out who is trying to kill him. So there's like a bunch of different things going on, and he is kind of like dragged left, right and centre, trying to deal with it all. But these books are just always really interesting. I think Matthew is a character. I always really love following him. Though he is someone who, if he ends up in any kind of physical altercation with someone, he will always lose. He always ends up kind of doing the wrong thing. He'll always end up on the worst side of a fight, which can sometimes be a little bit frustrating to follow because you know he's always going to lose. But as a character, I do really enjoy him. He's very, very clever, and he's very kind. He has like a really good heart underneath it all. And when you see a lot of the people that he's like around every day who are like kind of corrupt and not very nice people, it's very refreshing to see him, who is genuinely a nice person, who is like always trying to do the best for people. Yeah, I enjoyed this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to the next book. And then after that, I read another favourite book of the year. So May was a good one for me in terms of books that are going to be probably on my favourite books of 2023. And this is Blood, Sweat and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road by Kyle Buchanan. And I would never have picked this book up if I didn't see Audrey over at Perpetual Pages reviewed this in might have been their April wrap up. As soon as I watched that wrap up, I got this from the library because I was like, this sounds so interesting, I have to read it. I'm not like a huge film buff, and I'm not like really into like the making of movies. I like some of them, like the Lord of the Rings making the movies is always a classic, but I really do love Mad Max Fury Road, even though I've watched the first Mad Max and wasn't mad on it, but Mad Max Fury Road I really, really love. So because obviously it was about Fury Road, I was like, okay, I'm like really interested. And this is basically, the whole book is all interviews, and it's basically about how Fury Road took pretty much 20 years to make, from like the initial, this is like, we want to make a fourth Mad Max, what is it going to be about, all the way up to it eventually like winning Oscars, and the ups and downs and the struggles and the changes that were made for this movie, and how it's kind of like an absolute like miracle that no one died on set because of the type of stunts and the type of movie that they were trying to make, and how it has become like this really groundbreaking movie in terms of not just in terms of like the movie itself and the stunts and stuff like that, but also the, I guess, like the feminist twist on the book as well, and how Mad Max kind of became a side character in his own movie. And Furiosa, like this book is really about Furiosa, which I absolutely love reading about, and how all that kind of creative process happened. But yeah, I just absolutely love this. I just thought it was so fascinating. I am basically telling everyone in my life now all these like interesting tidbits about Mad Max Fury Road, because I just want to tell everyone what I know about the movie now, because I just found it like so engrossing, and there's just so many good bits. Now, I haven't watched the movie since reading this book, but I really do want to, because I feel like I will appreciate the movie so much more, and I'll probably notice so many more things that I've never noticed before about the movie. But this was a 5 out of 5 stars. If this intrigues you in any way, I would highly, highly, highly recommend checking it out, because it was just such a brilliant book. And again, I would never have checked it out if it wasn't for Audrey at Perpetual Pages talking about it. So I would definitely recommend people check it, because it's a brilliant, brilliant book. And the only criticism I have about it is I would have loved for this book to have pictures, and it doesn't have pictures, and that's just really, really disappointing. I would have loved some like behind the scenes pictures of the making of the movie, and like maybe them at the Oscars and stuff like that, or early scenes from the earlier Mad Maxes and stuff like that. That would have been like a really, I think that just would have like added to the book in a really great way. The end pages of this book are also really cool, I would like to add. And another disappointment is that I don't know if there is a making of the movie kind of behind the scenes for Fury Road. I don't think there is, but I'm really disappointed if there isn't, because I think it would be really, really good and I would definitely watch it. But yeah, 5 out of 5 stars, 100% recommend. One of my favourite books of the year, one of my favourite books of all time. Absolutely loved it. And then another book that I really, really enjoyed was Bitch by Lucy Cooke, and this is looking at basically what you would think. It's a non-fiction book that is looking at the female species within nature, and how kind of looking at like feminism, Darwinism, feminist Darwinism in a way as well. And Lucy Cooke has basically gone on a journey to look at all the female scientists within the world of science who are basically blowing a lot of like Darwin's original ideas about masculinity and like the male of the species, and the passive female versus the aggressive male, and they're blowing it out of the water, and showing that the female of the species can often be like the more aggressive, the more dominant, the bigger, the bolder, the better, like gender in a way in the animal kingdom. Comes to some kind of non-fiction that is more kind of science-based or nature-based, sometimes it can be kind of hard if you don't have like a very like scientific mind or a scientific background, but this book was really, really accessible. I found it really enjoyable to read. There were some kind of like jokey bits and kind of like a humor to the book that I really enjoyed. And yeah, I just thought it was like a really easy book to read, and a book that I found really understandable, that I really, really appreciated. I just thought it was amazing learning about so many different studies and stuff that were done way back around the time of like Charles Darwin and a little bit after him, and how people male scientists, I should say, male scientists basically have like revered Darwin as the be all and end all of the evolution of the species, and what he says goes, and what he like studied, that means that like that's what you have to believe. And how that belief has held back science in so many different ways when it comes to understanding more about the female species within nature, and how many times female scientists have tried to do more and have tried to find out more, or indeed have discovered things and then have been basically gaslighted or like shut down by male scientists in the field of by saying, well, no, you're wrong because Darwin did this. And it's just absolutely crazy, and there's parts of it that are infuriating to read because of that. But I just found like this book just like definitely increased my knowledge about the world of nature, and particularly like a female role within nature. Now this is obviously, there is a kind of a bit at the start of the book when it talks about kind of like um gender versus sex and stuff like that, and identity. But when we're talking about that in this book, it's specifically talking about the animal world, and there are many like examples within this book as well of like gender changing species, like gender changing fish, virgin births, things like that. A particular species that would be more non-binary in many different ways. So we are looking at, there is a chapter that's more about like kind of the LGBTQ influence within nature as well, and how you can see a lot of like queer, I don't know, like queer things or like queer moments within nature to show like that, yeah, like male and female again are, is quite arbitrary in many ways. But this was absolutely brilliant as well. I gave it a, I think I gave it a 5 stars too. So yeah, really loved this, and definitely recommend for people to read and not to be intimidated by it, because as I said, the writing in it is actually really accessible and easy to understand. So I would definitely recommend people pick it up. Last book I want to talk about is another nature book that I read for Springathon. This is an audiobook I read, and that was A Zoo in My Luggage by George Durrell. And this is a book that was originally published in the 1960s. And what I will say is this book is entertaining and it is well written, but all of my problems with it is because I wasn't reading it in the 1960s, and I'm not the 1960s audience that was intended for this book. This is like a non-fiction book. It is like basically diary entries from George Durrell as he goes to Cameroon to basically collect his own private zoo to bring home to England so he can like create his own zoo. And that in itself is a little bit of a like kind of moment, and that's kind of like where my issues did start with the book. So that in itself, like, yeah, I had some problems with when it terms to like animal conservation and like going to Africa, to an African country to just like take the animals and bring them home. And even though he cares for his animals and he's trying to do the best he can for like the time this is set in, there's still like, there's number one like a slight colonialism air to it. Like he calls it the British Cameroons as well, which is like ugh, like no. But also there were just moments in this like where he uses local hunters to be able to try and find particular species that he wants for his collection, and sometimes they bring babies to him, and it's like, what do you think is happening that like to the mothers that these guys are able to bring babies to you? Like we all know now that the mothers are killed so their babies can be taken and then poached. Like what he's actually doing is like paying poachers to bring him these animals, and that just left me like with a really icky feeling. Now again, this is set in the 60s. He actually thinks what he's doing is good for animal conservation, where what we know now as a more modern reader and like a more modern society, we know that that's not the way to go when it comes to conservation. So yeah, there were a lot of moments like that I just felt like, oh, like it just didn't really sit well with me. So yeah, I gave this book like a 2.5 to a 3 stars, because I just couldn't get over like those kind of conservation moments and the fact that he was literally poaching these animals. It was kind of hard to read. What I will say is though, he does have another book that is about his childhood in Greece and all the animals that him and his family kind of adopted and were kind of around their childhood home. And that actually does sound really, really good. So I might check out that book because I feel like that one will just like sit with me a lot better than this one. And as I said, I don't think there's actually anything wrong with this book for the time period it's set in. He has like a love for these animals, a respect for these animals. He also has a love and respect for the native Cameroonian people that he's talking to, and he has a really good camaraderie with the people he's staying with and a respect for them, and he shows all of that in the book. Though I will say the audiobook I was listening to had some questionable accents. But other than that, yeah, I think for the time period that this book is set in, or was written in and was for, it's a good book. It's just as a modern reader, it just doesn't work. Because there's so much outdated stuff in it that just is a little bit icky for today's time. So yeah, that's what I just want to say about that. Those are the first half of the books I read in May. As I said, I read a lot in May. I had a very, very good reading month in May. So yeah, please let me know what you guys think. If you guys have read any of these books, what you guys have read in May, I would love to know. And keep your eyes tuned for the second part of this wrap up, which should come within a week or so. So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.